come to realize over the past year that this party is too intellectually and morally corrupt to be reformed. I know for a fact that many in the caucus privately oppose supply management, but buying votes in a few key ridings is more important than defending the interests of all Canadians.
But don't worry, I don't dance and I'm not bringing a celebrity chef along with me. The point is, international trade and foreign affairs is a serious endeavor requiring serious leadership. It's time for the grown-ups to be in charge again.
Well, that is just two of many, two of many quotes that we had this weekend. Welcome to Agree or Disagree, the podcast, Sunday weekend edition. It is I, Kevin Olenick, and it's been a summer of challenges for the Conservative Party of Canada. First, we had and I'm using air quotes, the diversity tweets from Maxime Bernier. Then we had Maxime Bernier on Friday, or was it Thursday? Thursday. Was it Thursday? It was Thursday.
Thursday.
It was Thursday. Quitting the party to attempt to start its own. When you're working at home, you kind of forget what day it is sometimes. But it was Thursday. And then, of course, we had the actual Conservative Party convention, which was met with its own highlights and its own adventures. And at the end, is the Conservative Party better now than it was before? Or is this a party that is now divided and needs some help? Joining me to talk about this is Connor Turner, see Tover Drive on Twitter, from the fine city of Burnaby. Is there smoke in Burnaby right now?
No, there isn't. There's finally rain, which is good.
Yes, we had rain today here in Kamloops. I did not make it out to the Pride Festival, but the Pride Festival was today, and I imagine it was, from all I've seen, it was a really great day. But there was smoke for most of this month, and as I'm looking out, I can see blue sky and I can see the hills around me. So the smoke is starting to clear, which is great.
I think that's a big win for everyone in BC and Alberta.
Absolutely. It's been a bit of a hectic time this month. There's so much to get into here. It's almost its own little soap opera. I almost used the theme of House of Cards because this feels a bit House of Cardsy in a weird sort of way. But let's start from a couple of weeks ago, maybe, and then let's get in here. I think that this might be the best way to do this. What did you make of the diversity tweets, as I've so affectionately called them, from what Bernier said, and how this all was handled?
You know what? I think it's definitely not something that I agree with in regards to what Bernier's main core message was. But I think there is an underlying feeling within the conservative ranks and conservative spectrum of this country about the issues regarding diversity and that sort of thing. And I think what Maxime Bernier really was doing was setting the stage for reaching out to those disenfranchised people, especially people who are, not a big fan of some of the things that this Liberal government has done in talking about diversity and gender equality and that sort of thing. So I think in my regards, when you look at it in kind of hindsight type thing, it's pretty clear that Bernier's tweet storm that kind of set off, which was essentially the beginning of a bad week for the Conservative Party, was really reaching out to those people, those disenfranchised people, those people a little bit farther right on the immigration issue spectrum and that sort of thing. So I think it was a really interesting leeway to what happened this upcoming week here.
Yeah, we'll get into this a little bit more, but I was like, I heard from a lot of talk show people that were like, there was a lot on Twitter that was, because there was the hashtag Hey Maxime that came out, but there was there was a couple of talk show people that I was listening to across this country that was saying, but if you polled Canadians, most of them would agree. And there was actually a poll out, although I don't, okay, my precursor on this is polling 1,500 people, I don't always think is like, and using it as like the majority of Canadians, which Maxime Bernier tweeted, I don't necessarily like. I understand why he said it, because politicians do this all the time. I mean, John Horgan said BC voted for them when BC didn't really vote for them. Vancouver voted for the NDP. But anyway, I understand the spin of that. But it was interesting to kind of hear some of this conversation that a lot more Canadians agreed with Bernier than I think we care to admit.
I think it's a fair assessment. It's hard not to deny there is those undercurrents. And I think there's society is going through a lot of change, and there's a lot of people that are uncomfortable with the pace that change happens. And we're really trying to meld almost like two polar opposite kind of views when it comes to some of these questions about diversity and immigration, and fear of others and stuff like that. So it doesn't surprise me that there would be a chunk of people within Canada that would believe this, that would buy into what Bernier was saying, and would view, it is a Twitter storm. So, what was 10, 15 tweets in a row that came out?
12, I think.
This tirade?
Yeah.
Was it 12?
Yeah.
There's going to be parts of everything in there that, will attract different people for different reasons. They may not agree with everything he said, but there's going to be parts that resonate with them specifically. Yeah.
And then we had the incident with Justin Trudeau in Quebec and the woman that confronted him, and everyone was trying to defend her question, but it turned out after research that she's been part of a lot of right-wing national or right-wing French, really racist, let's be flat out, they're considered pretty racist organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people were defending her for what they felt was a legitimate question.
Yeah, and, I think being a little more hyper political myself, I was, when it first came out, I spent a little bit more time seeing what the full context of that and watching the full video and diving into what people were saying, especially online. I think your average Canadian doesn't spend as much time researching some of these things. So if you're watching the video, it looks kind of weird. She says something in French, and then all of a sudden, he replies, none of this racist terminology. But then when you dig into what she actually said, you realize it is, connecting back to that concept of old stock Canadians, or even worse in Quebec, where it's, you to be a true Quebecois, you have to be part of the first group of people that moved here and lived here, and no tainted blood, I think, is the rough terminology and stuff like that. So it was an interesting thing to see. I'm glad that the media finally picked up on some of the racist overtones and her connections to different groups within Quebec.
Yeah, a lot of people, a lot of people didn't at first, but then I tweeted out, everyone's angry that Trudeau is calling a racist. I don't understand why everyone's angry, but it did lead, it's funny though, because I do think it leads to what this narrative is that we're really spending a lot of time talking about, and where the Conservative Party ended up. And I want to, I'm going to play again what Maxime Bernier said on part of what he said on Friday, because I think it's going to play to our, I know we played it at the beginning, I'm going to play it again, because I think there's something in here he said that is interesting. Oh, wait, let me go ahead here.
Government. I have come to realize over the past year that this party is too intellectually and morally corrupt to be reformed. I know for a fact that many in the caucus privately oppose supply management, but buying votes in a few key ridings is more important than defending the interests of all Canadians.
So this was from his press conference that was held on Thursday, not Friday, where Maxime Bernier announced that he was not going to the convention, that he was going to basically quit the party, and basically he was starting his own party. Now, I guess, Connor, what would you have wanted Andrew Scheer to do with Maxime Bernier after these tweets? Which is funny, we're both from Alberta. We both witnessed what happened when Danielle Smith kind of basically ignored a very similar situation in her hands. There was there was the Lake of Fire at the time. That was the most famous one, but there was another one that said, another MLA said that the reason he's a candidate and people will vote for him was because he was white. And Danielle Smith knew nothing about that at that time.
Well, I think it mimics a lot of what pundits were saying, was that he wasn't, Scheer, to show strength and to show like he's in charge of this party, should have dealt with Bernier before Bernier had the chance to have his press conference the day the caucus was flying into the beginning of this conference. Bernier was able, because Scheer didn't act, he didn't censor him, he didn't get rid of him quickly, he didn't show a strong hand, which, is a tightrope to walk because Maxime Bernier has a fanfare within that party. He really let Bernier set the tone and dictate when this messaging came out. And to be frank, Bernier really just, torched this conference, this convention with that announcement on Thursday. The media has been all over it. It's been the conversation constantly. So to be sure, Scheer should have really dealt with this, when the diversity thing was, like when the tweets were coming out in between before the convention started, rather than letting it boil and boil and then giving Bernier the opportunity to really dictate, the conversation.
And, the other thing that he did in that speech is he spent a lot of time ripping into Andrew Scheer, calling him Trudeau light, calling him, basically he called the party pretty corrupt, but he felt that he was basically Trudeau light. He called him a moderate. He really put Andrew Scheer's leadership in question before this convention.
Oh, 100%. I think without question. We can talk a little bit more about it, but I think one of the big goals of this weekend was to really help frame Scheer on a national stage and get that, have a well-oiled machine convention that really focused on Scheer's leadership qualities. But you're right. He spent his entire speech, whether it's true or not, whether, there's only a handful of people that don't like Scheer in the caucus, but he was given that airtime to speak and to take shots as the leader. There's been a lot of talk about how Bernier is only in it for his ego and stuff like that, but really at the end of the day, those are the sound clips that got played leading into this convention.
Yeah, and what was interesting is that a lot of people were thinking, and I was thinking, man, this guy is out to lunch. He's out to lunch, Connor. Like, I don't get what he's doing. What is he doing? And, the amount of people that I saw starting to back and hearing and backing Maxime Bernier, I was like, this guy is knows something that we don't.
Yeah, I think that's one of the fascinating things, because obviously, one of the ways to discredit Bernier is for the caucus to come out in unity and say, I think there's tweets about how he was lazy, he slept through meetings and all this kind of stuff, or that he doesn't have enough ego, or he doesn't have enough support to build anything up. And he may not, we don't know what's going to happen over the next year and his idea of having a party and stuff like that. But I think it's almost impossible to discount how much influence and how well he did in this leadership race. To come in second in this leadership race, for the longest time before the weekend, lots of people were predicting he would win.
Yep.
He only lost by 1%. And there's a lot of articles about, why he lost, which is, basically boils down to supply management, Bernier's support for getting rid of that. So I wouldn't discount how much support this guy has. He spoke to a group of people within the Conservative Party. Now, to be fair, they're not, we're talking about, when we talk about people within the Conservative Party, the people who get involved in leadership races and go to these conventions are really the diehards, like the hardcore volunteers, the young politicos that want, start a career and stuff like that, the policy wonks. But he's speaking to that group of people who are really passionate. And I don't for a second believe that like he doesn't have a strong support within that group of people.
Yeah, and as you were mentioning this, Andrew Scheer was not in people's top two when people were talking about who was going to win the Conservative race. It was Bernier, and it was, I'm drawing a blank with who this was between, but it wasn't Andrew Scheer. Scheer was the guy that came up and kind of through the vote split or through splitting a vote or however that went.
Yeah, the proportional ranking of it really helped Scheer, right? Because, and I saw some of this during kind of the legendary Calgary Stampede barbecue circuit where lots of these leadership hopefuls were kind of going through. Scheer was kind of like the guy. He wasn't the first choice, but he was the second or third choice for a lot of people. And with this convention, their leadership selection, how it worked out with the 13 different candidates and ranked ballots, Scheer was high up there on as the secondary, third choice for a lot of people.
Yeah, it was. Basically, it was 50.95 for Andrew Scheer, and Maxime Bernier was 49.05 for the official vote. But there was. That was also the time, of course, how could we forget the wonderful time of Kelly Leach? There was Brad Tross, there was Lisa Raitt, there was Aaron O'Toole, Michael Chong. Michael Chong was actually highly regarded by a number of people as well. Andrew Saxton was Aaron O'Toole. There was a lot of people that ran in that race. Even Kevin O'Leary ran for a little bit. How could we forget that?
How could we forget that? I think he's still paying off his debts.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it was a full field, but through going to some of these barbecue events and stuff like that, you could see Scheer's team was well organized. Bernier was the populist. People loved Bernier. He was their first choice from the beginning. The libertarian vote was out for him. People that are against the supply management concept, they were out in full force for Bernier. And if you go back to that time before that leadership announcement, that convention, he was the number one. People were expecting him to win it. So, I think the party to discount his support or his influence is a little premature at this moment. And I understand why they're doing it. They're trying to, say he's a rogue and he's hard to work with and that sort of thing to take him down a notch in kind of retaliation. And that's the way you have to kind of deal with this. You can't just pretend it's not going to happen. You have to deal with it some way. But I don't think discounting Bernier's strength and popularity is a smart way to go.
How would you deal with Bernier strategically? Like, what would you be doing at this point in time?
You know what? If I was involved, I think you'd be doing similar to what they're doing now. I know it sounds kind of like ironic, but you have to do whatever you can to discount his influence, but then also at the same time trying to shore up his support and calm down his supporters or people who might be thinking about him, who might be listening to what he's saying and questioning what you do. You have to remain with a united front. Yeah.
Now, but a lot of people, there's some people that vote based on who the candidate in their riding is. But there's a lot of people that vote based on who the leader is. And
I would say the vast majority, yeah. Fully agree with that.
Yeah. So before all of this, do you think I'll give you what I think the perception of as Andrew Scheer was. A really ultra-right-wing, trying to bring back some of the stuff that we don't really want to debate anymore. He wants to bring some of that back. Very young, enthusiastic guy, but doesn't strike me necessarily as prime minister material. Would you say that that's a fair perception that people have of Andrew Scheer?
Yeah, I think that's a fair one, especially like towards the end. I don't think many people really know who Andrew Scheer is, and I think this talks about the overall issue that's facing the Conservative Party now is really an identity crisis. With Stephen Harper, whether you liked him or not, he was who he was, and he brought a sense of strength and unity and leadership to that party. Whether you supported it or not, it's undeniable to say that he was able to keep the sides of that faction together. Right now, I just don't feel like Scheer has really broke himself away or created any kind of identity. Like I kin him to a lot of some of the issues that Al Gore had.
That's a good comparison.
Very robotic. He doesn't seem to have that personality. He doesn't inspire you to believe in his leadership. And I know there's a lot of supporters of Scheer will point to, like Trudeau and, his selfies and all that kind of thing. But you know where Trudeau is. Like Trudeau, you either love him or you hate him type thing. But with Scheer, there's not really much on the personality scale to say that he feels like a unique political individual.
And there are two leaders right now in the Conservative movement that you like him or not, but Jason Kenney and Doug Ford, when I say those names, there is going to be instantly an opinion about them one way or another.
100%. Fully agree with that. Yeah. They are people who you know who they are the second they say their name.
Yeah.
Ironically, and I think we've previously chatted about this, but the Rebel media came up on Twitter that they went around downtown Toronto asking who Scheer is this weekend.
Or in Halifax, yes. They actually went downtown.
Yeah.
And near the convention, they were like at the busiest intersection, and they were actually out there, and they showed people a picture of Andrew Scheer this weekend, and no one knew who he was.
Yeah. That in itself there's two big issues, obviously, with that. One is the, standard, if everyday Canadians don't know who your leader is and you're 14 months out of an election, you really need to that's really a priority. Then obviously the other one, which, I'm probably not going to say to people to start supporting the Rebel or anything, but to have the Rebel actually taking pot shots at your leader that's a little sketchy one for some of the CPC supporters.
Yes, because the Rebel is typically known, and we're not speaking out of turn here. I'm not ultra criticizing the Rebel. That's for another time. But they've been more to be born on the right wing side of their. That's. I'm not speaking out of turn there. That is a fact. They've been quite conservative over their time. Whatever. I'm not going to get into that.
Yeah, that's for another podcast.
That's absolutely for another podcast.
Another series of podcasts.
That's a series, yes.
Yeah, but it boils down to people are still trying to figure out who Andrew Scheer is, and really this convention, and this is one of the biggest things that I think that the convention failed at was really redefining who Andrew Scheer is for the general public and for people to understand who he was.
Okay, so let's start with the speech, because the speech is basically was the introduction, I guess, or the that's when the eyes are on Andrew Scheer. It was a 55-minute speech. Basically, my take is it was an reintroduction of Andrew Scheer. This is who I am. This is my family. I didn't get the chance to see the fireside chat they did a little bit later on in the weekend. Did you have a chance to do that? Or
no, I saw a few tweets about it, but it was kind of a weird timing for these conventions. Usually the last day of the convention, people are leaving, especially when it's a national one like this one, where people, if you're from Alberta and you have to fly out to Halifax, it's basically a day's travel. You're pretty much heading out on the Saturday to get home for Sunday to get ready for work.
Yeah.
But it really didn't even look like it was well attended and that sort of thing. So I think that's, that's just kind of killer for the Saturday afternoon, last day of the convention time slot. It didn't look like there was much in that.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, and it was pretty long. There was a lot of, they were basically there for like 8 to 10 hours already. So can't blame anyone for that. But the big speech that he's talking to everybody, it's basically was an introduction. he spent some time taking shots at Justin Trudeau. He didn't. The one thing I thought that he said that was a little interesting was the Wilfrid Laurier comment about the $50 bill. Wonder if we'll ever have that debate. If we're going to debate John A. Macdonald, I thought it was interesting he brought that up. But at the end of the day, there wasn't a lot that I came out of going, legitimately this guy could be the prime. I never left with that. I felt that this guy was, I understand he's going to meet Theresa May, he's going to India, and he's doing all of these things. But I never, at the end of the day, felt that this guy was the Prime Minister of Canada.
Yeah, and I got that sense too just from watching a few clips of it and kind of reading his transcript, reading what he said and stuff like that. I don't think he really did much to redefine himself. And I think one of the funniest aspects of these conventions too is also as I kind of mentioned, you've got 3,000 people of your hardcore supporters. A lot of these conventions are geared towards giving them the red meat to get them excited, to give you money to work harder the next year. And a lot of his speech, while I'm sure they really wanted to use this to introduce him, was really just fed into that red meat sort of concept. He hammered on the India trip again, which is 6-7 months ago type thing.
Yeah. Really old news.
Yeah, it really is. And it seems to hammer on, you mentioned that he was talking about the Wilfrid Laurier, the $50 bill.
It is National Dog Day.
It is. Yeah, my apologies.
It's okay. So. We've had dogs on before.
That's always good. But, so kind of looping back here, we're tying into these issues that are kind of really get his, the core conservative voters angry, but do they really speak to your everyday, Canadian that's worried about stuff like climate change, the economy, that sort of thing?
Yeah, it spoke to a certain base of it, but I don't know if it spoke to Canadians of it. And which is interesting because Maxime Bernier did tweet out a poll today that talked about that. I'm going to pull this up. The Abacus poll.
I was reading that earlier. It's fascinating.
Yes. That he actually is gaining not only support from within his own party, but from other parties. And I think that that's something that I think that that's rather interesting because I do think that there's a lot of people right now in the big picture. I mean, I think if any media people went to Vancouver or in Burnaby, in your hometown there, Connor,
Jag not really hometown, but this is where I'm currently living.
We're currently living. Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, is going to be running in a by-election over there.
Yes.
And I think if you went to Metrotown and you went and said, do you know who this man is? I think you will have the same problem that Andrew Scheer is going to have, that people don't know who he is.
100% agree with that. I would actually say it's even worse. Yes. I think, this anger some of my federal NDP friends and stuff like that, but I think Singh has been a really big disappointment as a federal leader. He really hasn't given any, just recognition to his name and stuff like that. And I think it's even worse than what Scheer is running into right now.
Yeah. And there is a lot of people, by the way, that don't think that Singh's going to win that by-election.
You know what? I think it would be a tough one. I think it might be a tight race. It's kind of in the neighborhood. It's really actually the riding to the west of us. It's a very heavy minority area. So it'll play a lot on that. But it'll be interesting. He might not win it, but I think he will win it because I think the Greens aren't running a candidate to help dilute that. I don't think the Conservatives will be strong in that area, especially over the past few weeks. So it'll be really up to the Liberal candidate and how well and how hard they go for this riding seat.
Yeah, so with Bernier, And this is from the Abacus data. Before introducing the subject of Mr. Bernier's announcement, I'm reading from here. Great radio, I know, great podcasting. We measured voting intention and found them almost identical to the wave of research released on Friday. The Liberals have a modest lead of 37%, followed by the Conservatives at 33% and the NDP at 18%. It goes on to say, after describing Mr. Bernier's criticism of the Conservatives and informing respondents about his intention to form a new party which would reduce immigration, end supply management, and avoid retaliatory tariffs against the U.S., we ask voting intention again. In an election with such a Bernier party on offer, the Liberal lead would widen from 4 to 6 points nationally, but with potentially more significant impacts on a regional basis. 13% they would vote for this Bernier party, with half of them coming from this Conservative Party. And this is from the Abacus data. So already, and you're already seeing the name recognition of what Maxime Bernier is going to bring. Like him or not, there is already a name recognition. And
yeah, 100%.
And I think that there's a bunch of people right now that are they don't know where to vote.
Oh, I think it's a huge undecided. I don't think it's as much as it's been in the past. Like, I think 2015, there was probably a stronger undecided. But right now, I think there is a strong undecided viewpoint within the federal political scene. And it really reminds me, actually, like, this current status of where we are federally really reminds me of kind of like where Obama was in the third year of his very first term. My wife and I were living in Washington, so we kind of got to see a little bit of that during that period. But you have this leader that was voted in on this sea of hope and change, not living up to expectations, which are fairly lofty, to be honest, and then going through a couple stumbles through the second and third year, and people kind of questioning, is this the right leader, and that sort of thing. But I think what the people are more reacting to how Justin Trudeau's performed rather than what Scheer has done to draw their attention or vote. So when you throw it into Maxime Bernier, it's something fresh, it's something new, it's a different idea. They know what this guy stands for.
Yeah.
And he's speaking directly to a group, a voting bloc that's passionate about those three topics that we kind of mentioned.
Yes. Yeah. And this may have been another mistake that we'll get into the mistake of what they chose to discuss this weekend. But I think it's important to bring up Trudeau here. While he is well known, I think how do I word this? I think that basically he is not winning because he has done a great job. I think he is winning because the other two parties have done a worse job. I think that on the left, there's a lot of people in BC that are very, especially with how he handled Kinder Morgan from the left, that was expecting him to do something he did not do. I was living in Vancouver at the time, and there was a lot of stuff that he said that he was going to do about in Vancouver that hasn't happened yet, or there's a lot of people that feel he turned his back on the BC folk over there. And of course, the right will focus on everything that Trudeau has done right now. So, and I don't know, like, even if you're a Liberal supporter, I don't know if at the end of the day you can sit there and completely applaud what Justin Trudeau has done. I don't know if at the end of the day you're going to give him a standing ovation for this. But he is going to win because people know who he is. Did I lose you? Hello. Yeah. Anyway,
sorry about that.
All good. Yeah, sorry, we just lost Connor there for a quick second. But yeah, I'll just re-say what I said. Basically, I think that Trudeau is winning this because people know him, but it's not because people completely are in love with him. If either side of these parties have could figure out what to do. They could win, but they haven't figured it out yet.
No, and I would agree with you 100%. I think there are elements that Trudeau is kind of weak on it right now. And he's opened himself up to a lot of potential for people to make gains, especially the Conservatives and even the NDP themselves. As you said, like, there's people who voted for Trudeau based on proportional representation, his work on climate change and that sort of thing, and he hasn't really delivered on some of those aspects that those people would like him to do. So I definitely think there's room for people on both sides, for both the parties and both sides of the Liberals to steal some of their support, but they're really not able to do that so far. We're looking at 14 months out from the next election. They're still struggling to kind of dent into the Liberals' polling numbers at the moment. Yeah.
And so let's look at where else the Conservatives made some mistakes this weekend. I think the selection of some of the stuff so for those who didn't see it, basically they had two sections of workshops. It was basically health, social, and all of that on one end, and then trade and economy on another. And then they decided based on what people were voting for, these would go to the plenary, to the convention floor on Saturday, and they were voted on. And those included an abortion. First of all, I have to tell you, I don't know about you, but there was a lot of the wording of some of these things that were coming to the convention floor that were really confusing to me. They weren't worded the same in English and French, which was confusing a lot of people. And there was a lot of people, a lot of French-speaking people that were not happy what was going on. Because there were some that were worded really well in English, but not worded the same in French. And there were some that were worded really well in French, but were not worded well in English. And is this common, or is this?
I think that's interesting because I've been a part of political parties, specifically in Alberta, and gone to conventions where policy is brought forth by the members, by the grassroots, either the electoral district associations or the constituency associations. So I've never really seen that kind of duality in the language issues. But you do get a lot of these, really weird ideas that do come out, regardless of which party you are, policy things that are submitted for consideration during these conventions. Yeah, there was certainly some interesting stuff. And what came forward was not supply management, which Derek Fildebrand tweeted about, but pornography, abortion, and euthanasia. As well as the, I can't remember the specific terminology, but that anchor baby concept that made it through as, removing citizenship for children born in Canada if their parents do not residents of Canada. Yes, that too. That those 4 out of the 10 made it to the floor. Now, if you're in the undecided, what are you thinking here at this point in time? And what did you think of this? I think the party itself dodged a bullet with the policy and the bylaw, the change, the policy about abortion, the one that was struck down. I think they dodged a bullet with that. That would have been the icing on the cake on a really bad PR weekend for the party. But being able to say, we were able to strike this motion down, that's a win for them. A lot of people will walk away from that. I can imagine that some of the strategists for the Liberals and the NDP were just salivating at that getting passed. I think some of the other things, while they may not last long term for the party, and not many people are going to pay attention to policy decisions at the end of summer convention, that sort of thing. But this anchor baby issue is going to be brought up for the next week or so. I don't think it's an issue that anyone was really thinking about or talking about. It's not really that big of an issue in Canada. I think there was a stat by CBC Radio that there's 390,000 births last year, and only 318 would fall into this category of birth. But it's going to be a talking point coming forward. I think the supply, again, another similar one is the supply demand issue with the milk industry and that sort of thing. Again, that's not something I think people are really talking about right now this second, but it's going to be brought by with the media as something that's going to be discussed.
Yeah. The other one, of course, too, was moving the Canadian embassy to Jerusalem. I think that will be probably a talking point at some point in time. Not by everybody, but I do think that some on the political left might use that as a little bit of a leverage point. I don't know what you think about that.
Oh, I think they definitely will too, and it's really tied to that's top. I don't have any opinion on that. I'm very indifferent to that one, but I can see people on the political left using that to tie the party to Trump. That was one of their major planks. They got a lot of blowback from the international community about it a couple of months ago when they decided to make that a permanent decision by the U.S. government. So I think that'll be something that gets brought up. Not as much as this, the Zanka baby policy. I think that's going to be something that will come out of nowhere. And people will start talking about it. It kind of ties into the overall immigration storyline that's going on. And then the supply-demand issue. I think, Bernier's people, or if he has any team, will start really hounding on this kind of a topic. And I think for the average Canadian, it's not something they really think about, but for these, passionate conservative voters, it's something that they're really interested in.
So for those who, because a tweeter, a friend of mine who tweeted out something said that basically, like you, that not a lot of people really, if you were to sit them down and say, can you explain supply management? They probably couldn't. Could you explain supply management in like 2 minutes or less?
I could now, but about 2.5 months ago when it became a big issue, I had no idea it was the thing. It wasn't something. I think your average Canadian, they go and they buy milk. They don't care what the price is. It's always kind of been that stable cost. And, when someone actually explains the concept of supply management, you can see why people would want to move away from it. And I think there's valid arguments on the other side of things. Do we really want to have an influx of American milk products into our economy and into our food and stuff like that? So I think it's something interesting, but it is a complex issue that, I don't think your average Canadian was actually really thinking about. But now it's going to be something that gets brought up. And I think the problem now for them, that if it does continue to become a topic, is that the Conservative Party of Canada doesn't have an opposite viewpoint as the Liberals, right? Like, if this is a topic that gets brought up, people talk about, it's in line with the NDP, the Greens, the Liberals, and the Conservative Party all have the same concept. Bernier's got the different idea on this one.
Right. Yeah. And and that plays also to Bernier's narrative that this is Scheer and the Conservative Party is buying votes.
Oh, it plays totally right into it.
Yeah. Now, going back to the that vote, the Abacus data vote for a second, I think one of the other things that is really interesting is the support. They broke it down in provinces, and the Conservatives are with Bernier's party. The Conservatives would sit at 19%. Liberals would win with 45%. Conservatives would sit at 19%.
That's in Quebec, right?
Yeah. Now, and I think that this is another problem that I think the Conservatives are going to face. And this sounds, it's a fact. It's just ultimately at the end of the day, conservative Quebecers are going to vote for Bernier over Scheer because Bernier is from Quebec. And I think that's
I see that. I know a lot of people in the party have mentioned that, Bernier, in the leadership, he actually lost a lot of his votes, and he didn't win that many votes for the leadership in Quebec itself. But I think your average Quebecer is more likely going to lean towards Bernier. He's talking about some of the issues that are big in that province, as opposed to Scheer, who looks like another, Western Canadian leader.
Yeah, and they're not. It's just. I mean, yes, we sit in the West, and we're sometimes a little cynical about what comes from the East, but it's the other way around too, right? You have to remember there's some cynicism of what comes from the West.
Oh, totally, 100% on that one.
Yeah, like it's just, and I think that's going to be something. I don't think Scheer addressed that either, really. I don't think that the party addressed that this weekend at all.
I think they did briefly. They talked about they won there's the most recent by-election. The Conservatives won. I think it was like a Liberal-held seat for a long time. So that's a big feather in their cap. But they, even just looking at that advocacy data, they've got a long way to go in Quebec to really unseat the Liberals. Right now, looking at all those, any polling that does regional dispersion of regional numbers shows the Liberals with a huge lead in Quebec. And that's a huge issue going into 2019.
Yeah. What other things, like if you're from the Conservative Party, like coming out, what other concerns do you have here right now with the Conservative Party? We talked a little bit about Scheer and him not being down. Did the party come away with a different perception of who they were, or do you feel like, you know what, we're the Conservative Party and this is who we are, and to hell at anyone that wasn't conservative?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think from like kind of an outsider perspective, I think you're going to hear different viewpoints of this depending on who you talk to. When you talk to like people who went to this convention, they're going to be excited. They think that the party's stronger than ever. I don't think they really did enough to really change the narrative of what the party is. I struggle to find out where this party is going on a lot of different topics, such as like where is their stance on climate change. Like I understand that they're against the carbon tax, but what would they do differently? We know what their stance on immigration is, but what are their solutions to these things? And I think those questions will need to be answered over the next 14 months, and I don't think any of them were answered at this weekend. And to be fair, that's not what these things are about. These things are really to get the party faithful, energized, to bring them some new ideas and that sort of thing. But I think, with what Bernier did and how that dominated the conversation, they're really trying to find out what their identity is moving into this election.
And I'm starting to notice this more and more, but it's becoming, this is a party that is claiming the big tent and will welcome all ideas and all of this. But the moment someone, even with a modicum of a left-wing idea, comes out and says something, they are pretty much banned from being called a conservative. Like, you look at some people's perception, let's use Danielle Smith as an example. After what Danielle Smith went through, there is a lot of people in the conservative movement that will not consider Danielle Smith part of that movement. Even though it's pretty fair to call her a staunch conservative. But for you and I, who maybe sit more in the middle, but I heard a lot of that this weekend. I heard a lot of like, this is the conservative way. This is the way we as conservatives think. If, as an example, there was a conversation about having a discount for members to go to the convention for seniors. And one guy said, if you want that kind of thing, join the NDP. But we're not going to do that in the conservative.
Yeah, that is a pretty weird comment.
I just it's just, I think that's the other part that I think is a big problem, is they are really becoming this exclusive, if you're not one of us, even to the 10th of degree, you are against us. If you're not for us, you're against us. And they're presenting this us against the world. And they're also presenting this anti-media presentation that Doug Ford basically like, well, we didn't listen to the media. That's why we won. No, you actually kind of won because people were tired of Kathleen win. And that was completely incompetent. But, like, it's almost they are presenting this, we are opposed to anything that is not completely and utterly for us as conservatives, and in the perfect way.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to, like, really the struggle with the Conservative Party of Canada finding its identity, especially since Stephen Harper stepped down. I think people are realizing how important he was for the identity of that party. But you're right, like, they're talking about there's a lot of conversations online, and maybe at the convention a little bit about the fake news, and how the Globe and Mail ran with the story about Hamish Marshall saying hello to the Rebel Media people because he used to work there. And that was a big story, but that was people are calling that out fake news. But at the same time, the party also said, no, we don't want the Rebel to be at our convention, right? So how do you reconcile those two sides? And, how do you go back to your conversation, too, about that, if you want a seniors discount, you should join another party. It's a weird dichotomy. Like, what is the Conservative Party? What is the conservative movement in Canada nowadays?
Yeah, and they're trying, they've almost hitched their wagon. Like, I try to resent doing this because, like, people compare everything to Trump, but there's almost they're using the Trump political strategy. It almost feels that way.
They are 100%. And I think it's a conservative, it's a choice to make that way, but I think people are struggling with it. Like, the party itself is struggling on how successful that will be in the long term. One of the things about Canadians is that we pride ourselves on not being American. And I think this is why people are picking up on this, especially the Liberals and the NDP, is that, we pride ourselves on not being American, and nobody wants to be considered the same as Donald Trump in this country, right? But they're pulling some of the tactics that are very similar, like no new taxes, nothing. The absolutely against the carbon tax as a concept, but a few years ago, the carbon tax was considered the most conservative approach to dealing with climate change, but it's been thrown out the window. It's not the conservative way of doing things now.
Yeah, it's job killing now.
Yeah, it's a job killing. It's another tax on people. But it really is the most effective conservative manner to deal with climate change and to reduce carbon emissions without getting the government involved directly. It's a market-based solution, which is right up the alley of what a free market, well, not essentially free market, but a market-driven solution should be, right?
Yeah. It's an interesting point. I think I'm not really opposed to it. I mean, there's probably, like, I haven't noticed it really hit me here much. Having it here, I don't know. I mean, BC's not really complaining a lot about it. The BC Liberals brought it in, and they didn't necessarily want to reverse it. And I haven't heard a lot of BC Liberals, which is the Conservative Party out here, say anything about trying to kill it out here. So,
and that right there is the irony, right? Like, you have the Conservative, so the version of the Conservative Party in BC bringing in this carbon tax, which has been around for 10 years. Stats are coming out showing that it reduced carbon emissions while having the least financial impact of all the options on the table, but is being rejected as not the conservative manner to deal with climate change.
Yeah. And
so it's a fascinating, like, where is this party going? What are its solutions?
And Catherine McKenna, I don't know if you saw this tweet, was either yesterday or today, basically tweeted out that, again, we don't know what the conservative position on climate change is, and there's a $30 trillion opportunity out there. And Jason Kenney retweets this and says that this is ridiculous. It's not $30 trillion. And I think what her point is, the money part of it isn't, maybe out there. I don't know that. I'm going to assume that Catherine McKenna, as Environment Minister, knows more information about this than I do, and you do. I'm going to make that assumption. I could be wrong, but
I would hope so.
Yeah, But I think her point is what she's trying to say is that there is opportunity out there to do some really creative entrepreneurial things, and it feels like the Conservative Party is behind the times in that.
Yeah, and I think that was exactly her point with that tweet, and I saw that too. And that was essentially the point. Like, we are dealing. I know there are people who are against the science behind climate change, but I think I don't know, my personal opinion, it's decided there is man-made climate change issues, and there is an opportunity on an international stage for Canada to be a leader and create some investment, create some jobs and opportunities that way. And I think that's what the call out was. Is like, if you are going to be against carbon tax, what are your solutions? What are your solutions to these issues that are facing the globe and facing Canada? But they're not. There doesn't seem to be anything out there. We just want to talk about taxes, reducing tax burdens. Well, these are the issues that, and I think the Abacus data, not this one, but previous polls that came out, climate change is a big issue for Canadians.
Sorry, say that again?
I think Abacus data in their most recent polls have shown that climate change is one of the top 3 issues for Canadians right now. And there's no answers from the Conservative Party. And I don't think this convention did anything to answer those questions. It brought up different questions about where they stand on policy, but nothing to deal with some of the bigger issues that people are facing.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. What did they do? Looking something up. What did they do right this weekend?
I think they were able to kind of showcase their organization skills. I know that sounds really ridiculous, but one of the things that I think they would have loved to have seen more play on was their fundraising goals. They were able to, I think, they out fundraised 2-1 the Liberals in the last quarter. And this convention, I think they got something like 3,000 people there, which doesn't sound like a lot, but 3,000 people flying from all over Canada to come to a convention, spend their weekend, and talk about policy. That's a huge commitment for people. So those are elements that I don't think they lost in the narrative that happened this week, and I think they really wanted to talk about them.
Anything else?
And I think we mentioned that before. I think they did, shooting down that policy on directly, reopening the abortion discussion. I think that's a big win for a lot of the party faithful.
Yeah.
Because people would have just ate that one up. Bringing in speakers like Peter McCain, giving them an opportunity to speak again, I think that helped with a lot of people. Probably got a lot of people excited and that sort of thing.
Do you think he would take a shot at leadership again?
Peter McCain?
Yeah.
It's interesting. It all depends on how this election boils out, and I don't want to make predictions or anything, but I think if Andrew Scheer does lose this election coming up, I think it'll be interesting to see who throws their hat into the ring there. And I think there was a lot of candidates who people assumed would try and take a run in for the 2019 election that waited this one out, thinking that Trudeau would be a little bit more, weaker or vulnerable in a 2023 election. And I think that's when you'll see different candidates. I would not be shocked to see Peter McCain. He's a fairly young guy in the political world. Not as young as, Trudeau and Scheer and Singh or anything, but he's still got a few years left in him. And I think it'd be interesting to see him take a run.
Yeah. I'm thinking that. I'm also thinking, another name that we'll see. I think Rona Ambrose will take a run at it. I think
is she allowed though? Because she was an interim leader, or is that a technicality for only that leadership race?
I think that's only for that leadership race.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I think I'll have to look that up. But another name I think is going to run. I think Michelle Rempel is going to take a run.
I would not be shocked at that one either. She's taken a very high-profile spot within this party since the 2015 election. She's got a strong base in Calgary. I would not be shocked.
Yeah, and she is she is, we talk about people that is polarizing. She is polarizing. There are people that like her, but people that don't. And I do think it's kind of weird, but like federally, when I think of the Conservative Party, one of the first names that comes to my brain is Michelle Rempel, weirdly not Andrew Scheer. And I don't know.
No, I think that's a fair statement to make. She's a very vocal supporter and champion of the party. And, I would agree. I think I've seen Michelle Rempel speak through social media and global news more times than I've seen Andrew Scheer's voice.
Yeah. Is there anything else we need to? Okay. There is one other thing we do need to talk about, but in terms of the Conservative convention, is there anything else we need to talk about?
I think we've kind of hit on some of these topics, but I think overall, the interesting thing about this whole convention was, for me, because I volunteered for a couple of these conventions in the past, is what the media narrative, what I imagined that they wanted the media narrative to be, and what it ended up being at the end of the day. So I think the party itself wanted to reintroduce Andrew Scheer, shows unity, show how strong they are as a party, and avoid some missteps that give fuel to their opponents, like the Liberals and the NDP. But at the end of the day, once this convention is over, the Maxime Bernier is the biggest story. We've got the supply management issue that's come up, and now we're delving back into this immigration issue again with the anchor baby concept. So I think it's a really interesting thing, and just like to see what they probably wanted it to be and what it turned out to be. And it's hard not to look at this and without saying like this was a bit of a disaster of a convention. Now, people won't vote on what happened during this convention, but I think there's going to be a lot of questions that will linger and still linger moving forward for the party.
Yeah, it's not. I don't think that this boosted them. I guess to me, the one thing that I don't know if it was as damaging as I think the Leap Manifesto for the NDP convention was. Because I do think that politically was that was such a boondoggle of an error, in my opinion.
Yes, I'd agree with you on that. I don't think it's bad as that. And I don't think it'll linger as bad. But even the Leave Manifesto, I don't think many people in 2019 will be thinking about that when they vote.
No.
But yeah, this was a bad convention from an outsider's standpoint. I'm sure people at the convention loved it. They're excited. They're energized. But from a third-party media perspective, like what is the media narrative? I don't think they achieve the goals they want.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like if you just Google, even now, if you Google, Conservative Convention 2018, most of the posts are, what's happening with Bernier, the abortion issues that came up, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. They have to distance themselves from that. Lastly, we didn't necessarily talk about this before, but I think it would behoove us to not bring this up. You did live in Washington, so you were involved in American politics. A legend in American politics, I guess that's the only word that I would have, passed away this weekend, John McCain.
Yes.
What are your thoughts? What comes up for you? What do you think?
I think it's almost fascinating to think about where American politics has gone since Obama's election, and look at the dichotomy of that. It's fascinating to see how polarized that nation is right now. With the Obama election, there's a lot of backlash to John McCain as a person. He came into that election with a lot of goodwill, well wishes from the public, and that sort of thing. And to look at that is what John McCain brought to that election, and then what the results of American politics is right now, and how polarized it is. Mm-hmm. I think he lived a pretty remarkable life, and a lot of service to his country. I think it's a sad day for America.
Yeah, it is. Because I always liked John McCain. I have to admit, I'm a little scared of saying that because I've seen some tweets from some people that have been like, good riddance to bad rubbish sort of thing. And I can't see it. I look at this, the way he talked about Obama as an opponent. I think that was so rare. Even like he almost was in a lot of ways the conscience of the Republican Party. Was he perfect? No, absolutely not. There were things I did disagree with him on, but he felt like there was a lot of talk this weekend. It does kind of tie in, isn't it? Interestingly enough. I mean, there was a lot of talk from Andrew Scheer about a compassionate conservative. I feel like John McCain was a compassionate conservative. I feel like he's the epitome of what a compassionate conservative is.
Yeah, and I think he has taken that stature because of how much American politics has changed and how polarized it's become. Was it a few months ago where he came from the hospital to vote on the healthcare bill and ended up being one of the guys who kept the core elements of Obamacare alive? And I think those are kind of his lasting legacies. The clips that they're showing, the respect he got across the aisle from Barack and from his predecessor George W. Bush and the Bush family. I think those are kind of his lasting legacies, and obviously the years of service that he did and his story itself.
Yeah, his story of survival and who he was and the choices he made. And I know that some people are talking about his choices, but he lived in a different planet than we did. Like, he lived in a different, like, an entirely, like, no offense, keyboard warriors, but we live in a much safer way than John McCain's decisions that he had to make. And I'm not saying he made right ones, but he had to make some tough ones.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So, rest in peace, John McCain. Anything else that we need to bring up here?
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of it.
Good. I should let you know what the next guest on Agree or Disagree the podcast is Derek Fildebrand of the Freedom Party of Canada. Is this what the party is called now? Derek Fildebrand is coming on Agree or Disagree the podcast this week, so we are going to have a nice little chat about what's going on with Alberta politics. What is he doing? He's made some interesting decisions overall. So we kind of want to see where Derek Fildebrand is at. We'll kind of hear from him. So we're kind of excited about that. And I'm bringing up something else that I'm working on, which is I'm calling this the Real Life Roundtable. Maybe Connor, you'll come on. It's a non-political conversations that I want to have about like just real life stuff that people are having to deal with, like dealing with starting a business or kind of like dealing with self-criticism, things like just basic real life stuff that doesn't get a lot of, I'm using air quote, air media play, but are as important things that people are talking about. So those are things that are coming up. You're there.
Perfect. Yeah, no, that sounds really interesting. I'm excited to listen to these.
Yes. So follow Connor C. Toverdrive for all things of all things, and me.
All things of all things. That's a great way to describe it.
all things of all things. Yes, and KEVOLE as well on Twitter, Facebook, Kevin Olenick, Spreaker.com, KEVOLE, Soundcloud.com, KEVOLE. Subscribe on YouTube as well. Thanks for joining, everyone. We'll talk soon. Bye for now.
The thing about a town hall meeting, and it really is that it should be respectful, because that's the essence of democracy. We should hear from each other. We disagree or agree, we should have respectful town hall meetings. I understand the anger, the passion, but what's the point if we just yell at each other in all due respect? We shouldn't yell at each other. We should work together.